let's draft our back torso now. You're gonna need your tracing of your back bodice, but you can lay it off to the side for just a second. We need to kind of build our framework like we did for our front. So we are gonna start off with our L square ruler again, okay? You're gonna draft your center back and your hip level. So on our front torso, we had our L square like this. Now we want it so our center back is furthest away from us on the paper. Our hip level is still gonna be over on our left-hand side. Okay, so give yourself an L. Again, we are gonna label the corner of it A. I want you to measure out along your hip level. This is gonna be our hip arc plus a bit of ease, which equals 10 1/8 inches. So from A, measure towards yourself on this hip line, 10 1/8 inches. Give yourself a tick mark, label this B. Now at B, we are gonna square a line up, straight up from B. Again, from A and B, we're gonna measure to the right, and this is going to be our front hip depth. I know this is our back torso, but our torsos need to get sewn together on the side seam, and our hip depth levels are a little bit different from our front to our back, but since we need to sew them together, they have to be the same. So we're going to measure the same as we did on the front for the hip depth. We're gonna go to the right 8 inches from A and B. I want you to connect these two lines. Now over here is going to be C, over here is going to be D. Now remember how I said our hip depth is not quite the same from our front to our back. A to D, that is our front hip depth. Now we want to measure our back hip depth, which is going to be A to E. That is going to be 7 7/8. It's very close to D, but not quite. E. And again, it's only about 1/8 of an inch away from D. All right, once you have your back hip depth drawn in, we're gonna label this a little bit. I am going to label it hip level, down here A to B. D to C is our waist. And over here near C, we're gonna do the same thing where we measure 3/4 of an inch and give ourselves a dot. So if you look at our next steps on page 387 in the textbook, you'll notice that there's 3 different versions of how we can kind of finish our back torso. I am going to choose the compromise version because who doesn't love a good compromise, right? There's kind of pros and cons to each of these. I'm just choosing the compromise version because it is the compromise version. You could do really either that you want, but I'm gonna go ahead with version 3 on page 387. Follow along with me. Next step, you're gonna take your tracing of your back bodice that you have, and I want you to slash along your slash line from the waist up to, but not through your armhole. Again, we wanna leave a little hinge here so we can hinge it. The next step is the center back waist, the center back waist area of this. I want you to bring it here at E and line up the rest of your bodice along the center back line. So again, we're bringing this corner down to E. And then align this with that center back line and tape it in place. The next step we're gonna do is, again, to pivot this little section so that this corner here at X touches somewhere along our waistline. It does not have to be right at the dot. In fact, it won't be right at the dot. Just pivot, 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 making sure, I'm gonna stabilize this a bit more. Pivot, pivot, pivot until it touches, that corner touches right at the waistline. And secure that in place with some tape. Whoa. I'm gonna have you trace neckline around here down to X. Don't forget to mark the location of your notches and also mark the location of your shoulder dart point. You do not need to mark the location of this. Now you can remove this tracing. And fill in anywhere that your tape was covering. All right, now we're ready to kind of finalize this by filling in our contour waist darts, okay? We're gonna do a similar thing where we make some guidelines, we create this center line of our contour darts, and then we connect the dots around them, all right? Let's start off by find this corner right here that is your bottom of your armhole, top of your side seam. We are going to square a line towards center back that is 1 inch below that corner. So line the 1 inch mark on your ruler up with that corner and give yourself just a little mark right here. And you can use your L square ruler. Line the edge of it up with center back and the other edge of it up here. Give yourself a guideline. Again, it doesn't have to go all the way across your pattern piece, just make sure it's in the sort of centralized section. We're gonna create another guideline squared off from center back that is 5.5 inches below our waist. All right, I've zoomed you in a little bit so that you can see. Again, we're gonna start working along the waistline to create the dart intakes along the waist. All right, first mark we're gonna make, we're gonna create those guidelines that go up and down from these guidelines. That will be our center line of both of our contour darts, okay? So I want you to measure out 3.25 inches from center back on all 3 lines, your 2 guidelines and your waistline. 3.25 inches. And connect them. Now I want you to measure 2.25 inches away from that and give yourself another guideline for your contour dart. 2.25 inches away. And connect the dots. These are the center lines of each of our contour darts. Again, this first guideline should be 1 inch below this corner, squared off from center back. This guideline should be 5.5 inches below the waist. This first contour dart should be 3.25 inches from center back. This contour dart should be 2.25 inches from this one. Now I want you to measure 1/2 inch on either side of the center of those contours. Okay, these ones are much wider than the darts we have in the front. So ultimately, each of our back contour darts will be 1 inch wide since we're measuring 1/2 inch on either side of the center line, okay? Again, we're gonna do what we did before, and we're gonna connect the dots to the 4 points of each dart. All right, your contour dart should look like this. Let's go through and finish our side seam over here. I want you to connect this corner at the bottom of your armhole down to our dot. That line can be erased. It is no longer our side seam. Our side seam is gonna angle in a bit more. And again, from the waist down to the hip, we're gonna use our hip stick to create a nice gentle curve. Beautiful, beautiful. Again, I am going to use my French curve to just kind of mellow this out so it's not like, okay? So a few things we need to do. I want you to label this as center back. I want you to fill in your shoulder dart. Get punch holes going at each of your dart points and circle them in red. Make sure you actually use your awl or your punch tool to create holes. And again, you need to add a grain line and your label. So same with our back bodice and our back skirt, we're gonna default to cut 2 for this, okay? So get your grain line in, get your label done, all your punch holes, and then we are ready to walk, true, and blend the front to the back torso. Here is what you should have after you've drafted. We still have a little bit of finalizing left to do. So this dart is exactly like our back bodice dart. So we've already found the shape of the intake. We can just copy it and know we're good. This one, we created this during this drafting as we kind of pivoted these 2 pieces. So we have to start by folding this dart and finding the shape of the dart intake. So let's do that now. All right, found the shape of the dart intake there, looks awesome. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut along the side seam of both of these, but I want you to leave the paper intact kind of above and below the hip and armholes. All right, so where do our front and back torso get sewn together? Very similar to our bodice and our skirts, they're gonna get sewn together at the shoulder line. They're also going to get sewn together at the side seams. So what we wanna do is we wanna walk our side seams and our shoulder lines, make sure they match. We also want to blend the curves that go across our seams. Let's do it. I am gonna take one of my bodices and flip it right sides together with my other. I want you to align them at the waistline, okay? And what you're gonna do is you're gonna use your finger as a pivot point at the waist and pivot them up. So this, from the waist up, the side seams are walked. Ooh, I have a bit of a discrepancy here. Good thing I'm walking. Let's zoom you in here. What I'm noticing is that the side seam on my front is about 1/8 of an inch longer than the side seam on my back from my waist up. So I know that size 10, I want my side seams to be about 8 3/8 of an inch. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to figure out which one of these is correct and make the other one match it. So after a bit of investigating, I found out that my back torso, the side seam from the waist up, is correct. This one is a little long, and I don't know why. It could just be slightly inaccurate tracing or whatever. So I'm gonna, again, flip these together, and I am going to change this so that it matches this one. Match them up at the waist, pivot. All right, so now what I can do is I can lay them together, and luckily my side seams are a straight line, so I can just butt them up next to one another. Make sure that the waist is aligned. Get the side seams butted up next to one another. Now what I'm going to be able to do is I am going to be able to blend across the seam so that I can get the new shape for my front armhole using my French curve. I'm gonna come over to the other side. What I am wanting to make sure of is that these curves are blended smoothly from one side of the seam to the other. And I'm also bringing my armhole down to where my mark is. Pretend like those little tick marks are me erasing. Since I use Sharpie, I can't erase. All right, so do you see how I've now blended my armhole and I've also walked the upper portion of my side seam? All right, so now we wanna walk the side seam below the waist and make sure they match. So I want to align the waist at the side seam right here and pivot these over. The curves should mirror one another pretty well. And what I'm seeing is that mine is in really good alignment. If yours is not, this is where you would kind of adjust, the same way I did down here. All right, the last and final step is that we need to walk our shoulder seams and blend our neckline and our armhole curves across that seam, okay? Since I already have this dart nicely creased, I'm gonna go ahead and retape it. So here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna take closer to your necklines, and I want you to line your darts, your first dart legs up, okay? And then align the rest of that shoulder line. Make sure you like how your neckline is blended here. I'm gonna reblend mine a little bit, just so it's a bit more of a smooth curve. We don't want peaks, we don't want valleys, we want nice smooth curves. So Blend your neckline if needed. And we're gonna do the same thing with the second section on the outside of our darts. Line your dart legs up. Oof, yikes, I am way off over here. It's okay, this is why we do this. This is why we do this walking, truing, and blending to make sure that your patterns are correct. Now, this sort of discrepancy often happens the more you're tracing off a pattern, the more likely it was that you made little tiny mistakes or lost accuracy every step of the way. That's why you always have to go back and check your work and always have to hold yourself to a really high standard of precision. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back and do what I did on the side seam. I want to check and see which of these is closest to 5¼ inches. Because that's what our shoulder line should be for size 10. So that's what I'm kind of aiming for. I'm gonna measure my front shoulder line, 5 3/8. Okay, so I'm seeing that my back shoulder line is the one that is correct, so to say. So I am going to re-blend this by bringing that front shoulder line in to make it correct, okay? We're done finalizing our torso drafts. We found the shape of our dart intake. We walked all of our seams that will be sewn together, and we've blended all of our curves across those seams. As long as you have all of your markings and all of your labels on here, feel free to cut the rest of this out and it's ready to turn in. Good job.